Hey everyone, Walter Crosby with Helix Sales Development, your host of Sales and Cigars. Today's episode is the How to Think Differently About Sales with Nate Tutas. Uh, I'm really excited about this episode because we talk about relationship selling and how it is not going to carry the day if you just focus on relationships. You need to focus on a sales process, going through a good discovery, going through finding the compelling reason somebody's going to buy, monetizing their problems, really adding value to the prospect and to your customers. Relationships are strategically important. They're going to help you get to the table, but they are not going to carry the day. People are going to buy from you because they think you're your friend. If you're just buying them drinks and playing golf, it's not going to carry it. It's not the 1970s anymore. And that's what Nate and I discuss. So go grab a cocktail, go grab a cigar, strap in for another exciting episode of Sales and Cigar. Nate, welcome to Sales and Cigars, How to Think Differently About Sales. Appreciate you being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me back. Appreciate it.
This is, let me just say that we missed a month because of, our schedules were all jacked up and I caught shit for that. Like, wait, we need more Nate. Like, okay, we'll get more Nate.
All right. Well, I'm here. Let's make the most of it.
So I wanted to talk about something that I've talked about during the week with customers, with prospects, with other, colleagues, and with some salespeople and a client, and that's about how important relationships are in selling. So I'd like to set the stage, and then I'd like to hear your perspective because I put my perspective out there in video and comments and blog posts and such. But I think relationships are critical, are an important part of selling. I believe they get you to the table. I think Um, uh, they help us the most when we in a customer service capacity. And I think about it this way: we're going to screw up. We're going to make mistakes in delivery, or something's going to happen in after the sale. And it's like, don't judge us on the fact that we made a mistake. Judge us on how we handle the mistake, right? Do we own it? Do we address it? Do we get in front of it? Do we solve it to the best of our ability and make it up to the best of our ability for the customer? So I think relationships comes into play there and gives us the benefit of the doubt, unless it's a common thing. But I think there's too many salespeople thinking it's the 1970s. Well, you could go back to the 50s and 60s, but in the 70s, it was all about, did you like your salesperson? Did you enjoy the 3 martini lunch? Did you have a good time on the golf course? And that's who we did business with. And that's why they did business with it. Whether the product was up to snuff or not, I don't know. It didn't matter. So, and I think there's that carryover to today, where salespeople will just rely on this relationship, and when there's competitors pop in, and there's a significant price difference, and they rely on, Carl, it's just one of our competitors. You know me, we've been friends a long time, right? And you can't have that value conversation, and they just lean onto the relationship. So my position is that it's important, it needs to be there, but you also need to have a sales process that you follow. You need to understand how you create urgency and find those compelling reasons, and you qualify your people, and you're constantly helping them understand that you're adding value. Constantly might be monthly, might be quarterly, but it's consistently sharing the value you're providing, as well as building that relationship. So, all that being said, am I all wet?
No, I think those are all uh, extremely valid points. I mean, if you think about the era that relationship selling came from, if referencing the points that you made of 1950s, 60s, 70s, that era, if you just think about then, the speed at which business moved was drastically slower than what we experience today, right? A lot of times the salespeople that a business was even exposed to was based on who could drive there and spend the time, right? Now, you better be able to drive there. You better be able to hop on Zoom or Teams or whichever platform you're using, and you can have hundreds of salespeople at your fingertips if you're a buyer just by putting it out there that you're interested in purchasing something, right? Or just by being in a particular vertical that a company serves. So I think one thing that we have to consider is just the geographical density that we now experience compared to what it was back then, to just say back in the day, so to speak.
It's a smaller world.
It's a much smaller world. I mean, I have clients in Europe, I have clients in Australia, New Zealand, you name it, and that never would have happened in the 50s. Or if it did, it was you spoke to them once in a blue moon,
And
not
it
something
was
that
an
you experience now.
expensive travel. It was expensive travel, took a long time,
Yep.
wasn't encouraged.
Yep.
So that, I mean, that's a really valid point, that um, that whole idea of, if you just think about buying a car in the 1950s, 60s, and even into the 70s, you needed that dealership, you needed that salesperson to help you understand why you wanted the Caprice over the Regal or whatever, right?
Yep.
And you needed them to tell you what was under the hood, and why that was important. And now that's become a very transactional situation. And when I was first started buying cars, I mean, I trusted a particular sales guy. I was loyal to a brand,
Mm-hmm.
but I trusted that person to help guide me through the process.
Yep.
And now it's like you can do it on your phone.
Mm-hmm. And in my experience, I didn't used to do a ton of research before I went and made a purchase, because I'm more of an emotional buyer where I'll go in and say, hey, tell me about the vehicle, that kind of thing. And I started doing more research because those sales guys have become less and less intelligent around their own product, that
That's
I'm
kind.
going, now I got to figure it out because you're not figuring it out. I ask you certain questions and you don't even have the answer, you know? So there's that element of it too. I think a lot of it boils down to, um, and this comes up all the time, but it comes down to your level of professionalism within the profession of selling, right? If you run into a professional salesperson, they're not focused so much on the relationship side of it as they are with providing you with value and providing you with the information that you need in order to make an intelligent purchase, right?
But they make the distinction that I'm going to enhance my relationship with the individual by speaking to the value that this product, or I'm going to deliver, or the product's going to deliver,
Mm-hmm.
the value, how we're going to save you time, how we're going to save you money, how we're going to make you money, how we're going to reduce your level of risk, right?
Yep.
I mean, think about it. If you're putting your daughter's not driving yet,
Hope not.
right?
Just turned 3, so
You got to get her one of those little cars. Um, we got our daughter an Escalade, little car she could sit in and drive.
yep.
Um, yeah, that's a good practice thing. But when she goes to start driving, you're not going to just throw her in some jalopy,
Mm-mm.
right? You're gonna find her a car that's reasonably priced. That if she screws it up, it's not the end of the world. But it's not going to break down on the side of the road either,
Right.
and it's going to be safe if somebody does something to the hits her in an accident. So your perspectives on this change. So you need to understand what that is. Like if you walk into a place, look, I'm looking for a car for my daughter. That salesperson should be like, okay, this guy is going to pay up a little bit for certain things. So I need to
Mm-hmm.
find out what those things are by asking questions.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how you're going to develop a relationship with that salesperson, right?
Yeah, many times, I mean, it comes down to establishing rapport, right? Which is one of the most basic skill sets you can have as a salesperson. But many people still miss out on the fact that you have to ask questions to figure out what it is that the person's actually looking for. Where is it that they're at today? What is their ideal outcome in the future? What does that actually consist of? And then bring it back to the present and say, okay, so how can I help you with achieving that goal or objective, right? How can I help you to get that for your daughter? Safety is important in the vehicle. This is important to the vehicle. That is important in the vehicle. Great. I understand. What makes those important for you, right? Um, and understanding that side of it, not just taking it at face value. But yeah, a lot of times people think, oh, if I have a good personality, I can just go out there and build a relationship. Oh, if the relationship isn't built on the business value that's being provided, especially in today's market, you're not going to last very long. That's just a reality. The other thing, if we again kind of think back to the time frame and the era when relationship selling was really a big deal, not only did you have a limited amount of salespeople that you were actually going to be in contact with, you also typically spent a good amount of time with those individuals. Because back then you had to know if a delivery wasn't showing up, you needed to be able to lean on that salesperson to say, hey, I need you to leverage some of your capabilities within your company and help me to get this delivery or whatever the case might be. So you would go golfing, you would go out to lunches, you would go. Now, a lot of companies, especially the bigger companies, you're not even allowed to do that.
Right.
And if you do go out to lunch, you're not allowed to pay for it. Like
It's
there's a
become
whole
it's
different realm
become
there.
a thing in a lot of industries where um, that's real, right? You're
Mm-hmm.
not allowed to. But I mean, I've seen companies like, well, we'll pick up the bar bill for this part of the conference, and they don't even some of the people there don't even know who you are,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, unless you're the bartender and really doing something, right? And it's a whole show. There's no value being delivered by buying drinks in that sense. Sponsorships make sense if they get your name out there. It's a touch point. They see your name and then they walk through a conference room, an exhibit hall, and say, "Oh yeah, you're the guys that've been sponsoring this, right?" And they feel obliged to at least ask a couple of questions. And um, but it's the rapport. So let's go back to that for a second. How does Nate define that building the rapport? What does that mean? Because it's different than a relationship.
Yeah, and there's a lot of things that go into that, especially when you're a neurolinguistic programmer like I am,
Uh
because
huh.
you get into matching and mirroring, you get into matching predicates and things like that. So understanding if they're speaking visually, auditorily, or kinesthetically.
So there's a lot of salespeople that listen to this, and you just mentioned a word that most of them have heard but don't understand what a predicate is.
Mm-hmm.
So can you help them understand the predicate and why that's important in the matching piece? Because most people understand matching and mirroring people's body language and
Yep.
the speed of the conversation, going faster or slower,
Mm-hmm.
but matching predicates that make somebody feel comfortable. But can you kind of elaborate on that a little bit?
Yes. So the simplest way to describe it is that our brains process information through our five senses, right? So it's either visual, auditory, kinesthetic, gustatory, or olfactory, right? So taste and smell. And when we communicate in the way that our brain is actually processing that information. So if I to process something, if you say, hey, what does this project look like for you in the future? I said look like, which is a visual predicate, right? And if you then create an image in your brain and you start thinking through that, which I'll be able to pick up on eye accessing cues because eyes tend to go to certain parts of the brain based on images constructed or remembered, those kinds of things. Um, and you're communicating with visual terminology, predicates, visual predicates, and I then start talking about how that sounds, how that feels, things like that, we've now broken our rapport because your brain is having to then translate what that is. And many times when there's, it happens a lot in couples therapy and things like that, where you'll have two couples that are fighting over something and one is speaking solely in visual terminology, the other is speaking solely in auditory terminology. And when you actually help them to cross that bridge and start communicating on this with the same predicates and matching those predicates, now all of a sudden they're going, oh, I totally get it. That's what they're trying to do, right? So the predicates is essentially how that terminology relates to whether it's visual, auditory, kinesthetic. Most people aren't talking about how things smell or how they taste. We do. There's certain phrases that are actually
Depends upon
common.
what you're selling too.
Yes, it certainly depends on what you're selling. But many times, and there's phrases that are very common within our vernacular, like "this smells fishy" or something like that. It doesn't mean something smells fishy, but that's the way that we're describing it because someone is processing through that. They're just going, something's off here, right? But that's primarily what that means in a very short, abridged.
So it's important, how you take that. It's important for a salesperson when they're trying to build rapport to pay attention to what the prospect is saying,
Mm-hmm.
and not just how they're looking and they're smiling or they're got their arms crossed or their whatever their body language is, but actually the words that they're using to describe how they're thinking about the thing you're talking about,
Yep.
right? And if they're using visual cues or auditory cues, you need to be able to match that,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I know we just blew a bunch of people's brains. Like I'm just trying to remember that I'm supposed to talk about value, not just features and benefits, right? Now I got to
Mm-hmm.
pay attention to, the verbs that people are using and how they're describing things. Only if you want to get good at it.
Mm-hmm.
Only if you really want to be a professional.
Yep.
If you're comfortable making what you're making, then don't worry about it. Um, but if you really want to take the next level, that you need to get comfortable with being uncomfortable and trying to pay attention to that.
Mm-hmm.
So the relationship. See, I look at rapport as finding some kind of common ground that you can relate to, but it's more about being likable to me. Um, and to be likable, I my dumb sales brain, I just break it down to I want that person to talk.
Mm-hmm.
I want them to talk to me about things. So I'm going to be curious and ask questions and get them comfortable sharing stuff with me. So when I'm all done with some discovery, whether it's early in the discovery process or we're just building a little bit of rapport or I'm late, they should know very little about me, and I should have a whole dossier on them
Yep.
if I've done a job well. And not to say that I do that all the time, but that's the goal
Mm-hmm.
is, and that's how you build rapport by shutting up, listening, asking good questions, and paying attention to the answers and using the answer to clarify, not making any assumptions.
Mm-hmm.
Right? This is the part of the sales process that we're talking about. And all of that builds the relationship. And then it makes it possible to go have lunch with somebody and communicate with them about something other than your business or your product, right?
Yep.
But that to me is after. And there are some cultures in the world that I think if you try to cross those lines, you immediately lose the ability to build rapport and relationships.
Yes.
And in this country, down south, very different than New York City or the East Coast, very different from the Midwest, Great Britain. Like, you're not talking about their family and their children and where they went to school until you've demonstrated some value in the business, right? And then they let you in a little bit, and that takes more time.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know about Australia and New Zealand, but and I think um, APAC is completely different than everything else. So, um, But if you're gonna be in those markets, you got to know how to talk to people
Hmm.
and understand those cues.
Yep.
Is
Well,
it is it different in Australia and New Zealand?
it's got its differences, yes, absolutely. But it's it's also has its similarities. So it's a subset of other cultures in a way, but it also has its own unique culture in and of itself.
Hey, thanks for being part of the Sales and Cigar community. I wanted to share that I wrote a book, The 7 Critical Mistakes CEOs Make with Their Sales Organization. The CEOs who've read it tell me I cut to the chase quickly, get to the point, explain exactly what they're experiencing, why they're experiencing it, and how to fix it. So if you want a free copy, go check out the link in the show notes. Now let's get back to the interview. But I mean, in our country, we have wildly different little pockets of people, right? That you you have to respond differently in Alabama than in New York City.
Yep. Yeah, my first role in sales, I had just the Atlantic coast from Maine all the way down to DC and a little bit inland, a little bit from the coast itself. So I had like Pennsylvania and states like that. But even just the difference between dealing with a New Yorker versus dealing with someone from Pennsylvania, you had to be able to shift because New York, they expected everything. Pretty much, I always described it as like if you think of the disc profile, New York, they were all high Ds. Like you pretty much assume everybody's a high D. If you're in New York City and the immediate surrounding area, if you were in
In the
northern
boroughs, yeah.
New York, it changes quite a bit. But um, yeah, being able to shift and adapt yourself accordingly to that was huge.
You have to be whoever you need to be for that particular prospect or customer.
Yep.
It's our job to respond to that as a
Right.
salesperson.
Yep.
They don't come to us, we go to them.
Yep.
In that sense.
Which comes down to your level of professionalism as a salesperson. You need to be studying disc and personality profiles and things like that so that you can quickly pick up on those things and identify them in the individual. You need to be studying and understanding language patterns and things like that so that I most of the time with as far as I've gotten through neurolinguistic programming, there's things that people say that they don't realize 5, 6, 7, 10 questions in. I already knew what it was that their challenge was with the first thing that they uttered, right? The first thing that came out of their mouth. I knew what the problem was. I still had to go through the process of establishing rapport. So I couldn't just say, "Oh, based on that, this is the problem." But you
Yeah,
get to
because
a
then you
point
become
where
a wizard in their mind, and then now you've scared the shit out of them.
right, which does happen from time to time. But the 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 thing about that, and you brought up a great point of you have to be able to ask really good questions. I get asked all the time, well, how do you know which questions to ask? And it's like, well, if you get just an innate curiosity about you to the point where every call you're going, how quickly was I able to pick up? Were they speaking visually? Were they speaking kinesthetically? Were they speaking auditorily? Did I pick those things up? Did I respond correctly? Did I do this? Did I do that? If I'm listening for it, I also know that especially if it's visual, if they have a picture, it's probably different than the picture that I created in my own mind, right? So I have to make sure what are the differences between their picture and my picture and figure out those differences. Same thing with auditory and kinesthetic, but um, that allows you to be just insatiably curious about the other individual and ask questions, and especially when you communicate in their mode, their modality that they're communicating in, their predicates. Um, it it's like a shortcut for building rapport many times.
Yeah, it is, and I think most salespeople are going to struggle to get to that level quickly. But if they hang their head on the one thing that you started with is like literally being curious,
Mm-hmm.
and even if they get the predicates wrong, that'll come to them if they really start to pay attention.
Mm-hmm.
So if somebody says, what I'm hearing you say there, Mr. Salesperson, right? That tells you they're auditory.
Mm-hmm.
So you need to start matching that and summarizing things in the same way. But but if you're in the moment and you're having a conversation and you're listening, really actively listening and trying to understand it will happen. It might take longer. Like you can shortcut it with understanding things like NLP and DISC and other personality profiles. Those are shortcuts that help you get to where you need to go, but you can't use those as weapons. You
No,
still got to go through the process.
no, because the other thing that's crucial that people understand is that everybody is also their own unique individual. So as much as we can quote unquote profile people into certain buckets, those buckets don't cover everything, right? In NLP, we have a phrase that the map is not the territory, meaning my way of thinking and viewing the world is different than yours because we have a different set of experiences, right? So you may be a high D in certain scenarios and you may completely flip flop in other scenarios just based on how it's actually being applied. So it's understanding that and understanding how do I best communicate with that individual from a likelihood perspective, but still having the behavioral flexibility that you can adapt and change if needed.
Yeah, and I mean that's deeper. But like I'm a high D. Um, but in certain situations, I have no freaking idea what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I don't know if that makes me a high D in that space, but I can tell you that once I figure it out, I'm immediately back to the high D,
Mm-hmm.
right? I literally am not mechanically inclined. I'm not like Joe Fix It. I can fix it with a hammer, a screwdriver, and a checkbook, right? If I can't fix it with a hammer or screwdriver, I'm going to fix it with a checkbook, and I know what to do. But I needed to do something with a carburetor the other day on a small engine, and I didn't have options. I had to like figure it out, and I took it apart because I couldn't take the thing to the guy. So I took the carburetor off, and then I took it to the guy and said, "Hey, this needs to be rebuilt." Gave him the thing, came back, put it on, and it fucking worked. And I was like immediately a high D because I'm a small mechanic, small engine mechanic. I can work on a carburetor. I couldn't put the carburetor together. I couldn't take it apart,
Yep.
but now I know how to take the carburetor. So I'm back to that confidence level again
Mm-hmm.
at that little thing.
Yep.
And I had to do it again with the snowblower. I had to take that off and redo it. But no question, I tried to fix it, couldn't fix it. So boom, take it to the guy to rebuild it. So that was a little rabbit hole, but I think but my confidence level came back, and I'm like, I told my buddy, I'm like, hey, I'm a small engine mechanic now. I can fix a carburetor. Because I was scared to death to take it apart.
Mm.
Because you got to put it back together. You got all the linkage, and they got the little slider things for the choke and whatnot.
Yep.
Um, anyway, so relationships are critically important, but they are not going to carry the day based on, you use the term geographical density, but just because the world is so small today and there's so much competition, if you don't have competition today, you will tomorrow. Um, so you need to build that relationship, but you build it by following a process, by having adding value to your customers, being a professional,
Mm-hmm.
and the relationship will help you carry that time when there's some doubt. Um, I think it really helps us in the customer service area, but that alone is not going to get it done anymore. The three martini lunch is done.
Right. Yeah. If you're a professional salesperson, and by that I mean you're studying all these different things, you know your solutions inside and out, you know your customers inside and out, you know how to apply the solution to the customer to get them the best result possible. You become and you start establishing what Dave Curlin refers to as that speed on base quality, where they're focused on you as the individual. So when that customer gets themselves into a bind, you're the first person they think of to say, oh, I got to call Walter. He'll have a solution for this. He'll know how to take the carburetor off and at least get it to the point where I can get it to a mechanic to get it fixed, right? But when all you're doing is relying on the fact of, we get along really well and we're chummy and we like the same sports teams, or I took them to a game, or I took them out for dinner, or whatever it is, when they get into a problem, when they're in a pickle, you're not the first person they think of. right? They think of you when they want to, hang out and have someone to talk to and
They
waste
think of
time.
you when they want entertainment, and they
Yeah.
think of you when they want that free thing.
And how many businesses nowadays have that time where you're not expected to be, nose to the grind, getting the work done and moving the ball forward every time.
I mean, there are businesses that still have suites at ballparks and still do that. I get it. It's part of certain things, but um, you and I run small businesses, and I had a guy from a local sports team. They have two teams here in Detroit, and he's like, trying to be all chummy with me, and I'm like, dude, I have no interest in buying season tickets for either one of the teams. Well, why not? One, I don't care about the teams, and two, I don't have the time to go entertain people. My people don't need that because they're not here.
Mm-hmm.
My customers are spread all over the country. Um, it was interesting. He like said, "Okay, thank you," and hung up the phone. There was no attempt to, well, is there something I can reach out to you when we have some single tickets, or he just like got that objection and moved away really fast.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so anything you want to add to that relationship piece before we land this little bus?
I think the biggest thing is just if you haven't already come to the realization that relationships aren't necessarily going to save you, then it's about time to come to that realization. Relationships can enhance things if the professionalism is already there. Don't get me wrong. Relationships are an add to, but they are not a end all be all in and of
They're
themselves.
not going to buy because you're friends.
Correct.
And I think the last thing I want to say here is that if you really want to understand neuro linguistics programming and you want to get into it from a sales perspective, right? You don't want to be the master NLP guy where you can go, you know, hypnotize somebody and be Tony Robbins, right? We're not talking about that. We're just talking about becoming a higher level professional in sales, that they should reach out to you, Nate, because you have programs in place to be able to help them understand how to mirror that, help them understand what they need to know, and not worry about the other NLP stuff that really doesn't apply. If they want to, you can help them with that because you're a master trainer, but you can really help them focus on being a better salesperson.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Correction, I'm a licensed trainer. There's an actual licensed master trainer. So I only say that because if any of the master trainers over here, I'll definitely be getting some shit for it.
All right, Dr. Bandler, and then the rest of the NLPers. I misspoke, but I I think you have the skills to be able to help somebody from the sales perspective to become a better professional in 10 times the investment they would make with you.
Yes. Yes, hopefully so. And I appreciate that.
Thank you, sir. I'm sure we talk on a regular basis, but we'll be looking forward to the next one of these recordings.
Sounds good. Look forward to it.
Thanks, Nick. I love sharing secrets when I figure them out. That's why I created this program called Sales Hiring Secrets. Early in my sales management career, I was terrible at hiring salespeople. They failed more often than not. Then I discovered the secret that you can't hire salespeople the same way you hire everyone else. That's why everyone fails. In Sales Hiring Secrets, I'm going to teach you all of the secrets to understanding what you really need your salesperson to do, how to attract an ideal candidate with a unique job posting. I'll teach you how to save time and money by only interviewing candidates that are a good fit. I'll share the secrets to an interviewing process that ensures success. And the one big secret that everybody gets wrong is how to onboard a good salesperson so they ramp up quickly and stick around. I'm doing the Sales Hiring Secrets program on a monthly basis. You can click the link below to figure out when the next Sales Hiring Secrets program is scheduled, and you can sign up. Click the link below, and you get all the details. And it's designed for you to bring your entire team so you can get everybody up to speed quickly. Thanks. Look forward to seeing you on the other side.